3 days ago, Mexico woke up to something it had not seen in years. And what followed in the next 72 hours may have permanently altered the balance of criminal power across an entire nation. On the morning of February 22nd, 2026, Mexican federal forces moved through the mountains near Tapalpa, Jalisco, before dawn. The operation was precise, coordinated, and backed by United States intelligence. By 7 in the morning, it was over. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, known across Mexico, inside the DEA, and in federal courtrooms as El Mencho, was dead. He was wounded during the raid and died while being airlifted to Mexico City for treatment. 6 others were killed in the operation. The most wanted criminal in the Western Hemisphere had been eliminated. Within hours, Mexico stopped feeling like a country at peace. What happened next was not spontaneous grief. It was not chaos. It was organized, coordinated, and terrifying in its scale. Across 20 Mexican states, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of the most powerful and ruthless criminal organizations on Earth, activated. Roadblocks appeared on highways from Jalisco to Tamaulipas. Vehicles were set on fire. Storefronts were shuttered or burned. Schools canceled classes. Buses were pulled from their routes. At Guadalajara International Airport, passengers fled in panic. In Puerto Vallarta, a city where American tourists take vacations, beachgoers were told to shelter in place. More than 250 cartel roadblocks were recorded across 20 states in a single day. This wasn't a crime wave. This was a message. And it was sent to every government, every rival cartel, and every citizen in Mexico at the exact same moment. But to understand what that message means and why it matters far beyond Mexico's borders, you have to understand who El Mencho was, what he built, and what his death has now set in motion. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera. Cervantes did not rise through Mexico's criminal underworld the way most cartel leaders do. He was not born into a narco dynasty. He was born in Michoacan, but began his criminal career in California, where he was arrested on drug charges and spent time in a federal prison in Texas before being deported back to Mexico. He then spent the next 2 decades building something that law enforcement analysts describe as unlike anything they had seen before: the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which he founded and ran with an iron grip, became less of a traditional trafficking organization and more of a vertically integrated criminal empire. The cartel moved fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine. It ran fuel theft operations that cost the Mexican government billions of pesos annually. It extorted businesses, laundered money through sophisticated financial networks, and controlled entire supply chains, from chemical precursor imports to street-level distribution across multiple countries. According to reporting from Reuters and the International Crisis Group, El Mencho ran what analysts described as a very centralized organization. Every major decision passed through him. Every territorial expansion had his authorization. Every military-style operation against rivals or government forces bore his signature. That centralization was both the organization's greatest strength and, as of February 22nd, its most dangerous vulnerability. Security Minister Omar Garcia Harfuch confirmed that the operation in Tapalpa was planned over an extended period, with support from United States intelligence agencies. The raid itself lasted only minutes, but the response from the Jalisco New Generation Cartel made clear that even in death, El Mencho had built something with the capacity to strike back on a national scale. 25 members of the Guardia Nacional, Mexico's National Guard, were killed in the coordinated counterattacks that followed his death. 30 cartel operatives were killed in firefights with security forces. 1 civilian bystander lost their life. In total, more than 60 people died in the 72 hours after El Mencho was eliminated. The death toll alone would have made this a significant security event. But the geography of it, 20 states simultaneously, elevated it into something of a different category entirely. Yet, what makes this different from anything before is not simply the speed of the response. It is what the response reveals about how deeply the Jalisco New Generation Cartel has embedded itself into the physical infrastructure of the Mexican state. To understand how Mexico arrived at this moment, you have to go back to October 2017, and then forward through a series of escalating crises that the Mexican government was never fully able to contain. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel did not become Mexico's most powerful criminal organization overnight. It rose partly because the organizations that came before it were systematically weakened by government operations. Operations that removed leaders but never dismantled structures. When El Chapo Joaquin Guzman Loera was captured for the final time in 2016 and extradited to the United States the following year, analysts celebrated what they called a landmark moment in the war against organized crime. He received a life sentence in a Brooklyn federal court in 2019. But the Sinaloa cartel he had led for decades did not dissolve. It fractured, competed internally, and continued to operate, and the vacuum his removal created allowed rivals, including the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, to expand aggressively. Then came the Culiacanazo. October 17, 2019. Mexican security forces attempted to arrest Ovidio Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons, in the city of Culiacan. The Sinaloa cartel's response was immediate and overwhelming. More than 600 armed gunmen poured into the streets of the city. They blocked highways, threatened soldiers and their families, and the Mexican government released Ovidio within hours to stop the bloodshed. It was one of the most visible public capitulations of a state to a criminal organization in modern history, broadcast to the world in real time. When Ovidio Guzman was finally arrested in a second operation in January 2023, the violence that followed was nearly as severe. Armed convoys, burning vehicles, blocked highways, and airport disruptions. A pattern that has now repeated itself again, at even larger scale, in response to El Mencho's killing. The lesson that each of these events taught, to the cartels, to the Mexican government, and to the watching world, was the same. In Mexico, the elimination of a kingpin does not end the war. It starts a new one, and now the pattern is repeating. But this time, the stakes are higher. As of February 24, 2026, Mexican authorities reported that the 250-plus roadblocks established across 20 states had been cleared. President Claudia Sheinbaum addressed the nation at her morning press conference, stating that the country was calm, that she had awoken to no active blockades, and that schools and flights were expected to resume by Tuesday. Security forces reported that the situation was, in their words, practically re-established. But cleared roadblocks do not mean a resolved crisis. What security analysts and organized crime researchers are watching far more carefully is what happens inside the Jalisco New Generation Cartel now that its founder is gone. David Mora of the International Crisis Group described El Mencho as having run a very centralized organization, and noted that there is no clear direct heir, no publicly identified successor, no established line of command ready to assume control of a criminal enterprise that spans more than half of Mexico's 31 states and generates revenue from fentanyl trafficking, methamphetamine production, fuel theft, extortion, and human smuggling across international borders. When a centralized criminal organization loses its center, one of two things typically happens. Either an internal power struggle begins, with factions fighting for control and destabilizing everything around them, or a rival organization moves in to fill the vacuum before any internal consolidation can occur. Both scenarios produce violence. Both scenarios produce civilian casualties. And both scenarios are, right now, actively unfolding. The Sinaloa cartel, already in the middle of its own factional war following the arrest of Ismael El Mayo Zambada in July 2024, has territorial overlap with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel in multiple states. The two organizations have been rivals for years. With El Mencho gone and no clear successor in place, Sinaloa factions, particularly the Los Chapitos wing led by Ivan and Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, are almost certainly already assessing what territory can be taken, what alliances can be broken, and what operations can be absorbed. The Guardia Nacional is deployed. The Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional has troops in the field. But military presence has historically contained the surface of cartel violence without touching its roots. And in the mountains of Jalisco, in the port cities of Michoacán, in the highways of Guanajuato, those roots run very deep. Because what happens next doesn't stay in Mexico. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel is not a regional problem. It is a transnational criminal organization with supply chains that reach directly into the United States. And its primary product, the one that has killed more Americans than any war in a generation, is fentanyl. According to the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is one of the two organizations most responsible for the fentanyl crisis devastating American communities from coast to coast. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid roughly 100 times more potent than morphine, killed more than 70,000 Americans in the most recently reported year of data. The chemical precursors for that fentanyl largely arrive from China, are processed in cartel-run laboratories in Mexico, pressed into pills or cut into powder, and smuggled across the southern border in quantities large enough to supply a continent. El Mencho's organization was central to that supply chain. His cartel controlled key trafficking corridors through Jalisco, Nayarit, and Colima, states with Pacific coastal access, and moved product through border crossings from Baja California to Tamaulipas. Those corridors did not disappear when he died. The laboratories are still operating. The smuggling networks are still intact. The fentanyl is still moving. What the power vacuum does create in the short term is uncertainty about which faction controls which route. And historically, uncertainty in cartel logistics produces violence, not disruption. Rival factions fight for control of corridors. Prices and loyalties shift. And the drug supply to American cities often increases during these transitions, not decreases, as multiple competing organizations push product to establish market dominance. American tourists were in Puerto Vallarta when gunmen set vehicles on fire, and hotels told guests to stay in their rooms. Guadalajara, a city of more than 5 million people in its metropolitan area, that was slated as a venue for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, saw chaos at its international airport. The State Department's Level 4 Do Not Travel Advisory for the state of Sinaloa was already in place before these events began. After February 22nd, the advisories for Jalisco and surrounding states are under review. The Trump administration publicly praised the killing of El Mencho as a major blow to organized crime. The White House applauded the Mexican government's operation and the role of United States intelligence in making it possible. But praise does not translate automatically into stability, and the administration has been applying sustained and significant pressure on President Sheinbaum to demonstrate results on fentanyl trafficking. Pressure that accelerated after Trump took office and has not eased since. Sheinbaum acknowledged the United States intelligence support for the Tapalpa raid, while making clear that the operation itself was entirely a Mexican federal action. That distinction matters politically. But on the streets of Culiacan, in the airport terminals of Guadalajara, in the hotel rooms of Puerto Vallarta, where Americans were waiting to be told it was safe to come out, the distinction between who planned the operation and who absorbs the consequences is not a meaningful one. And yet, no one seems to have an answer for what comes next. President Sheinbaum has publicly criticized the kingpin strategy, the doctrine of targeting and eliminating cartel leaders, as a flawed approach that removes individuals while leaving organizations intact, and often triggers the exact kind of violence seen in the 72 hours after El Mencho's death. She is not wrong about the history. Every major kingpin elimination in Mexico over the past 2 decades has produced a successor crisis, a factional war, or a territorial reshuffling that generated as much violence as it prevented. And yet, the elimination of El Mencho happened under her government, with United States intelligence support, and with her confirmation of that support on the record. She is now managing the consequences of a strategy she has questioned. Consequences that include more than 60 people dead, 20 states disrupted, and an organization that has lost its leader, but not its infrastructure, its weapons, its money, or its territory. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel has survived raids before. It has survived the deaths of mid-level commanders. What it has never done is survive the death of its founder. No one inside Mexico's security apparatus, and no analyst outside it, can say with certainty what that means for the organization's future. Whether it fractures, whether a successor emerges, whether the revenge attacks of February 22nd were a final coordinated demonstration of unified power, or the opening act of an internal collapse that could make the last 72 hours look like a prelude. What is known as this: across 20 Mexican states, ordinary people went to sleep on the night of February 21st without knowing that by morning their schools would be closed, their roads would be blocked, and armed men would be burning vehicles on the streets of their cities. 500 residents in rural Sinaloa were displaced. Approximately 1,000 motorists were trapped on blocked highways in Jalisco. Students stayed home. Flights were grounded. A Costco in Puerto Vallarta burned. And in Washington, officials praised the operation as a success. The roadblocks are cleared now. The president says the country is calm. The security minister's statement counts the dead and declares operations ongoing. By the metrics that governments use to measure these things, February 24th looks better than February 22nd. But the Jalisco New Generation Cartel still controls its laboratories. Its trafficking corridors are still open. Its weapons are still in the hands of thousands of operatives who woke up on the morning of February 22nd without a leader and have spent every hour since deciding what to do about that. The fentanyl supply chain that runs from Mexican laboratories to American streets did not pause for a single day. El Mencho is gone. What he built is not. And history, from Culiacan in 2019 to the mountains of Sinaloa in 2024, to the streets of 20 Mexican states last weekend, has shown us clearly what happens when power like this goes looking for a new center of gravity. The situation is not resolved. The war is not over. And the next chapter is being written right now in the mountains of Jalisco by people whose names we do not yet know. Watch carefully, because the next 72 hours will tell us more than the last 2 years ever did.